TCU needs to go get 2 offensive linemen in the spring transfer portal window.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right, Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. I've been covering TCU athletics for the past 12 years. We are brought to you today by WayFair. I'll tell you about them later on in the show. TCU women's basketball, they're in action against BYU tonight. TCU ranked 8th in someone's Big 12 power rankings, talking about football. So we'll discuss that, where they are, where I think they'll be in the preseason poll, those types of things. But we start today. We've been doing this series, going position by position. Does TCU need to add people in the transfer portal at these different spots? Today is the offensive line. Yes, they need to add 2 offensive linemen in the transfer portal. If you listen to this podcast on a regular basis, you might groan and kind of roll your eyes and say, oh, wow, it's the weekly segment where Steven talks about improving the offensive line or improving the run game. Maybe a bi-weekly segment or is bi-weekly when it's multiple times a week? And I should know. I'm in mortgages, but I always forget. Anyway, not important. Bottom line is, yes, I talk about this a lot. It's something that I've harped on. And it's really just because the passing game was great last year, which I love. The offense improved. We have high expectations for the defense, maybe not to be an elite unit, but to at least improve in year 2 under Andy Avalos with a lot of returners coming back, hopefully with a really good pass rush led by guys like Devin Deal. But the one thing that appeared to be holding the offense back last season, I won't even say it's distinctly the offensive line because I don't think it just falls on them. And there were some things they did really well. They protected Josh Hoover very well last year. There were some games where they struggled, but overall they did a very nice job keeping him clean, giving him a good pocket to throw from, and allowing him to make plays in the intermediate passing game, short passing game, and even down the field. Kendall Briles, really nice job coming up with some creative packages and some creative ways to supplement what they were lacking in the run game. If this team, if this offense specifically can be more balanced, it will pay huge dividends for them in a lot of different areas. It will help the offense. It will help Josh Hoover. It will help the defense by playing complementary football. To do that, I think they need more depth on the offensive line. Hear me now. I'm talking about depth. Your starters on the O-line, if I had to guess today, if I had to make a projection, I think Ryan Hughes will be your left tackle. This is if they don't go get anybody. This is just like with the personnel they have right now. I think Ryan Hughes is your left tackle. At left guard, you got Cade Bennett. At center, you have Colton Deary. At right guard, I believe you'll have Carson Bruno. Could be Remington Strickland, maybe Cooper Powers, but if I had to make a guess right now, I'd say Carson Bruno will start the season there. And then at right tackle, Ben Taylor Whitfield. So your 2 tackles, young guys that have developed through the program. Ben Taylor Whitfield's played a lot of snaps. He had to come in as a freshman. It wasn't an ideal scenario, but he did that. He played a lot last year as well. He's an experienced player to a certain extent. Ryan Hughes got some snaps late in the year. Oklahoma State game comes to mind. Got some opportunities. They like what they're seeing from him. That's all good. That's positive. You also have your 3 transfers. You're kicking Colton Deary over to center from guard, where he started every game last year, because James Brockermeyer is off to Miami, right? Bruno and Strickland kind of switched games, switched drives at some point during the season last year. That was never really a place at the other guard spot where they had a lot of consistency. And then Cade Bennett is a very intriguing name when it comes to what TCU is doing on the O-line, because he was honestly kind of the crown jewel of the transfer portal class last year from an O-line perspective. He gets hurt. He has a back injury. He can't go. He's healthy now and ready to play. Is there some concern about him coming off a back injury? Yeah, but he was really good at San Diego State. Also spent some time at Oklahoma State in his career. I think he'll fit in really well here at TCU and should be ready to play right away and get after it. So honestly, your starters, your interior offensive line, I feel pretty good about. Now, I would love to have one more O-lineman in that center guard spot just for competition's sake. Because to be honest, I wasn't super impressed with the Strickland-Bruno combo last year. Now, is it possible those guys improve through the offseason? Of course it is. But I have questions about that. I also have questions at both tackle spots just because you're banking on young players stepping up. And at a certain point, you got to do that. You got to say, you know what? We've recruited these guys. We've developed them. We believe in them. We're going to allow them to get out there and play and see what we got. But I would make it a priority to go get one more tackle. And you know what? If you have a young player at the other spot, if you have a solid starting left tackle with experience, and then on the right side, Hughes and Whitfield battle it out, go get it, I like that. I like that scenario. The challenge here is I have had people reach out to me, parents of offensive linemen and defensive linemen that are currently on TCU's roster. They're like, listen, you don't understand how in demand these guys are up front in the trenches. They're getting crazy money. Earlier this offseason, Howard Sampson hit the portal, right? Howard Sampson, he was at North Texas. He briefly committed to TCU last offseason, ended up following Randy Clements, who was his O-line coach at UNC, to North Carolina. Spent the year at North Carolina, hits the portal again. I assume gets a big payday from Texas Tech. TCU, unfortunately, wasn't really in the mix, but that's the type of player I would love for TCU to go get in the transfer portal in the second window. Because I think you need somebody at that tackle spot who can start right away. It is worth noting they did add a tackle in the transfer portal. Rasheed Jackson from Incarnate Word. He played his high school ball at Duncanville. He actually spent a lot of his high school career in Ohio where he played basketball. He goes to Duncanville. He ends up being a contributor his senior season. Then he goes to Incarnate Word. He played a lot of snaps on a team that was in the FCS playoffs last year. I don't think Rasheed Jackson's going to be ready to start right away. I just don't believe that's going to happen. I like the potential of it. I think it's a good kind of projecting out in the future. This is somebody who can help you. Right now, I don't see him stepping in and being in that spot right away. So I feel like you got to go get somebody who can play the tackle spot immediately. At guard or at center, whichever direction you want to go, something within the interior offensive line, I feel like you can get away with, not get away with, but your focus can be, we just need somebody who can give us some depth there. Meaning, someone who can come in and compete. A very similar story to what Remy Strickland and Carson Bruno were, but with the expectation of, hey, we can't guarantee you a spot, but if you want to come in here and you show us that you can impress us, we'll give you a chance to start. Or if we have some injuries, at least we have somebody there in the wings who can step in and make things happen. Because we're going on 3 years now of what I like to call kind of, well, if all these things, when we're talking about the season, we're talking about a certain position group. It's like, well, if somebody can stay healthy, if somebody can step up and improve, then we're in a good spot. And I realize that's a lot of college football, right? It's a tough, offensive line's a tough position to project. It's a tough position to have a lot of confidence about. But I've said this before, in TCU's scenario, it feels like this is such a glaring thing. And it's one of the few things that this team doesn't excel at or didn't excel at in the second half of the season. And it's really just one part of it. It's not even the pass blocking. It's honestly just the run blocking. And yes, running backs and quarterbacks play a part in this too. If you had a dual threat QB, your run game would be better. But guess what? You don't. If you had a 20 or 30 carry type of game running back who could break tackles and run through contact, your running game would be better. And I would love for Nate Palmer or Jeremy Payne to be that back. I don't know if they will be. And I'm not sure if they have anybody on the roster right now that has that type of body type to be a durable force like that. And that's okay. You can build your team like that if you want to. But if you're going to do it that way, then I think you need to focus on having an above average to an elite level offensive line, if possible, to make that running back look good. To take some pressure off you having a great running back or a dual threat QB, because the bottom line is you don't. And yes, I will give kudos to Kendall Briles and Sonny Dykes for figuring out ways to work around and sort of MacGyver this run game up last year in the second half of the season to make it work. They did that. That's worth saying, hey, great job. High fives all around. But this offseason, work hard to get to a place where you don't have to do that again. Where that's no longer something that you have to focus on, where you can feel confident that, hey, we can hand the ball off on 1st and 10 and get 4 or 5 yards. We can get in a heavy package on 3rd and 2 and feel good about moving the line of scrimmage and getting a couple yards to get that first down. Can TCU do that? That's going to be one of the keys to this season. If they can, they will exceed expectations that they have at a national level. I'll talk about those expectations next here in Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. So one of the things I figured out when I was an adult is that furniture is really expensive. I remember the first time my wife and I went to go look for like an actual bedroom set, and I saw the prices and I was like, wait, what? It costs this much to get a bed frame and a mattress and a couple dressers? It was insane to me. WayFair is a great place to check out because after the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little extra tender love and care. I always find that decluttering and refreshing your space helps you get back into your routine. Whether you're tidying up, cleaning out, or just want to give your space a new look, start the year, WayFair has everything you need all within your budget. There's something for every style and every home. WayFair makes it easy to tackle your New Year's home goals with endless inspiration for every space. What style of decor do you like? WayFair has it for you. WayFair can help you out. Give your home the refresh it needs with WayFair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. WayFair, every style, every home. Make the furniture process easier by checking out WayFair today. So FanSided put out their way too early power rankings for Big 12 football next year, and TCU came in at 8th. Now, all these things like preseason polls don't mean as much as they used to because with the new playoff, like they still mean something, but back in the day, it really did mean a lot because if you weren't in the top 25 or kind of in the picture at the beginning of the year, it was really difficult to work your way into the top 4, right? You basically had to go undefeated. Now, with the way things work with the automatic bids for conference champions, it's really just about winning the conference title. So if TCU drops an early game to North Carolina or SMU, I don't want that to happen, but it doesn't mean the season's automatically over. Honestly, Arizona State last year, your Big 12 champ, who took Texas to the wire in the playoffs, they looked dead in the water early, about midway through the season with losses to Cincinnati and Texas Tech, and they rallied and made it happen, right? It's just about kind of getting hot at the right time. You still have to win a lot of conference games. But I was surprised that TCU came in at 8th. The rankings, I'll run them down. BYU at 1, Arizona State at 2, Iowa State at 3, Kansas State at 4, Baylor at 5, Texas Tech at 6, Kansas at 7, TCU at 8. Interestingly enough, TCU plays everybody in the top 5. Baylor, Kansas State, Iowa State, Arizona State, BYU, all on the schedule in 2025 for TCU. We've talked about this. It's a difficult schedule for the Frogs. The blurb that was associated with that 8th place ranking, the Horned Frogs were quietly one of the better teams in the conference last season. Josh Hoover returns, and while they lost a couple of playmakers, they should still have an explosive offense. Defense needs to take a step forward, but if they do, TCU could be a dark horse contender. Quietly is a word I've heard a lot. I saw that in the schedule release too. Someone was like, hey, TCU quietly won 9 games. And I feel like after that debacle in the first half of the season when they were 3-3, most people kind of tuned out. Unfortunately, aside from that Baylor game on the road, TCU didn't really have any big-time matchups after that. All the teams they played were sort of in the middle or the bottom of the conference like them. And then they played the New Mexico Bowl, which is not the most hype bowl matchup. It was against a group of 5 team. They handled their business. They did what they could do. But it's intriguing to me because I think as a fan base, we have really high expectations. And I think we should. Because from the perspective of like where they are on the development cycle, veteran quarterback, veteran defense, they've invested in the skilled positions where they've lost a lot of talent and they're trying to get better there. So they should be good. Like when you think about how do people – when you see all these like season preview magazines and all these prognosticators who make their picks early in the year, really what they're looking at, because not everybody can dig into every team in the Big 12, and especially not every team nationally. So they're looking for highlights. How much returning production do you have? How much continuity do you have among your coaching staff, among your players? How are you going to replace the talent that you lost? So far, TCU's checked a lot of those boxes. They're banking on continuity this year. Basically, the entire staff is coming back. You got a couple of position coaches who left, but your coordinators are still here. Your head coach is still here. Receiver is where you lost the most talent. That's where you've been most aggressive so far in the transfer portal. You've got your quarterback returning. You've got your defense coming back. It's all pointing towards being good. But that being said, I think they're going to end up in the middle of the road in these Big 12 projections, preseason projections, simply because they didn't make a lot of waves late in the year. Texas Tech is at 6. And honestly, Tech and TCU had very similar seasons. It was kind of up and down. It was inconsistent. Now, Tech had some nice wins late in the year. That win against Iowa State on the road was impressive. And they made a lot of noise. They've made a lot of noise in the transfer portal. They are being very aggressive in adding talent. So people are going to flock to them when it comes to who's a trendy pick to win the league or to make noise in the Big 12. Also, their schedule, just to be real about it, seems pretty manageable on paper. And TCU's does not seem near as manageable when we just look at the matchups on paper. So, yeah, I feel like they're going to be under the radar, which is fine. Traditionally, TCU has done much better when there hasn't been a lot of hype around them. And I think there's benefits to Sonny Dykes. When I saw him at Media Days a couple years ago, he talked consistently about player leadership and culture and how in his first year that was so good, and then it really tailed off in year 2. And this past offseason, he talked about that a lot as well. I do think last year, despite the ups and downs, it says something that the team didn't just throw in the towel. After the UCF loss, after the Houston loss, they could have said, hey, just not our year. Things aren't going right. There's no reason to keep busting it out here on a weekly basis. But they didn't do that. They hung in there. They won the rest of the games on their schedule with the exception of one. And they didn't have a huge bowl matchup. But to their credit, they stuck together. And that game was never really in doubt. Got a little sloppy in the second half, but that was after they had gotten out to a big lead. So I like the way that this is setting up, but you got to execute and you have to finish it once the season starts. And again, you're playing BYU, you're playing Iowa State, you're playing Baylor, Arizona State, the defending Big 12 champs. You're playing all these teams that are also right there jostling for position at the top of the league. Now, the negative about that is they're going to be tough games. But the positive is, from a Big 12 perspective, these are going to be big-time matchups. And you have a chance early, if you can go knock off Arizona State on the road, to announce like, hey, we're here. If you go beat Bill Belichick in North Carolina, that's going to be talked about. Now, maybe that doesn't end up being a huge resume builder when we talk about a potential playoff team and all those things. But that's going to be a standalone game on Monday Night Football where you have the chance to say, hey, this is us. This is who we are. SMU, that's going to be a very highlighted matchup because of the history there, the ending of the Iron Skillet, and also because SMU's coming off a playoff appearance. All those Big 12 teams I mentioned, those are going to be featured in College Game Day segments, hopefully, where we're talking about, like, what are the big matchups of the week? So you have your chance to leave your mark this year. but you got to take advantage of it. When we come back, a baseball note, also TCU Women's Hoops back in action tonight. Locked on Horned Frogs, your team every day. TCU baseball will kick off their season on Valentine's Day, Friday night, against San Diego. 4-game series against San Diego. Late starts because they're on the West Coast on Friday and Saturday, but then 3 p.m. on Sunday, 2 p.m. on Monday. All the games are on ESPN Plus or KTCU if you want to listen to it. Interesting season coming up for the Frogs. A lot of unknowns, but ranked in the top 25 in every poll that I've seen. And Kirk Sarloos has brought in Bill Mosiello to take over, the hitting coach role. Got some guys like Ben Abelt, Cole Klecker, Cademan Parker that have had experience as starters in the bullpen who will be kind of anchoring the pitching staff. But a quick injury note, J.D. Andrus from Sports Illustrated, covers TCU, said TCU projected starting pitcher Ben Abelt is trending to not pitch this opening weekend due to an injury. There's no long-term worry for the lefty, but the Frogs will start the season without their projected ace. So Ben was most likely going to be the guy that got the start on Friday nights. This doesn't sound serious, but I always get nervous when we talk about pitchers, and it's like, hey, we're just giving them a little bit of time off. And then suddenly you look up and they're out for a few weeks. It's always tough to predict when we talk about arms and arm fatigue and those types of things. It's not great news. However, still a chance to get some different guys thrown out there. I imagine it's going to be kind of a hodgepodge this weekend with the starters and also just with the bullpen. TCU's counting on pitching bouncing back. Kirk said in one of his media availabilities recently was like, one of the great things about having Bill back is that I have more time to just focus on pitching. Like I'm kind of back to my roots and I'm working with the pitching staff on almost a daily basis. And that's like, I'm laser focused on that, which should be good because I've said over the last few years, it feels like one thing that's missing is just the consistency from your starters. Now, Peyton Tolle was awesome last year, but there's been multiple seasons in the past 5 or 6 years where it feels like you're sort of scrambling and trying to throw a rotation together, even going into like April and May, that makes sense and that can give you good innings week after week. So it seems like you're kind of in that situation again, where at least to start the year, there's a lot of questions and it's kind of about who emerges, but we'll see what that looks like once the games get underway Friday night and they take on San Diego in a 4-game series. Then they'll go to Globe Life, where they'll play Michigan, Arkansas, and Kansas State. And they don't come home until the end of February 28th, hosting Southern Miss. So tough non-conference slate, as it typically is for TCU. They're not afraid to play people, and they're trying to build up that RPI as much as they can early in the season. They're picked to finish third in the Big 12 behind Oklahoma State and Arizona in the preseason poll. TCU women, they're back in action tonight against BYU. They played Saturday against Texas Tech, playing at home again tonight, so don't have to travel. That should be good for the team. Get a little rest on their legs, that type of thing. 6:30, ESPN Plus. The thing that has stood out in the last couple of matchups, Kansas State and Texas Tech, TCU has really struggled to get the ball up the floor consistently. They keep getting pressed, full court, a lot of trapping, a lot of that going on. So Mark Campbell's got to find a way to adjust. And I don't know if it's going to be personnel driven. I don't know if it's something with the way they're trying to get up the floor, passing the ball, but they've had to work way too hard just to get into their half-court sets and then actually have the ability to run something. Hopefully that's something they can work on and get right as they play BYU. They're tied for first place along with Baylor and Kansas State. And I say big games as in these are teams that are ranked in the top 25. They play Baylor at the end of the year. They also play West Virginia, who's in the top 25. And then in between that, they've got games like tonight against BYU. Really no margin for error. That loss in Manhattan, it sort of got wiped out by K-State losing over the weekend, but it doesn't give them the opportunity to drop any more games. We're talking about a Big 12 championship. But the good news is in some way they can kind of control their own destiny if they can run the table here and hope that K-State drops one more ball game. we'll keep an eye on that. We'll have recaps of that tomorrow. It's Locked on Horned Frogs, your team every day. Subscribe to the YouTube channel or on your favorite podcast platform.